They didn't even look me in the eye when they handed me the kitchen seat. The autumn wind curled past the linen tents and brushed the hem of my navy dress as if to say, "You're late to your own erasure." I stood at the edge of the vineyard, clutching the embroidered invitation in one hand, my name scripted in gold leaf, and scanning the crowd for some sign I hadn't just imagined my place here. But there it was, the seating chart pinned on whitewashed wood, listing every branch of the Carter Walsh tree, except mine. A thin woman in pearls and headset finally approached me with the kind of strained smile reserved for inconvenience. "Miss Carter, you'll be over here?" she said, guiding me away from the aisle lined with oak chairs and toward a side tent where heat lamps buzzed faintly and caterers maneuvered around folding tables stacked with champagne flutes. The kitchen. I stared at the folding chair next to the trash bin. My name was handwritten on a place card. A concession, not a welcome. I sat, slowly, measuredly, because rage when you've carried it long enough becomes quiet. From across the lawn, laughter rose like birds startled into flight. My brother Zachary stood at the altar in a crisp three-piece suit, beaming as if he'd never once made me the villain in family stories. His bride Rebecca floated toward him, all silk and strategic innocence, her arm hooked through Gerald's, our father's, like she belonged more than I ever had. He never even turned to glance my way. The ceremony passed like a watercolor blur, vows, applause, clinking glasses. The speeches began with the usual cliches until Rebecca took the mic. "I just want to thank everyone who built the Walsh legacy. We stand on the shoulders of giants, of visionaries, of selfless leaders, especially Gerald and Linda." My chest tightened. My parents nodded graciously, their eyes soft with pride. No mention of me. A cousin leaned toward his date stage, whispering, "Didn't she just get lucky with that tech app? What's it called? Grubstack, Grubstack." The very app that had funneled $3.2 million into the Carter Walsh accounts during the lockdown. The app that paid off 2 mortgages and kept 37 employees on payroll when their vineyards couldn't sell a single bottle. But sure, luck. Zachary, perhaps sensing something, took the mic. And of course, my relentless sister Emily. He chuckled. Always pushing, always critical. But hey, that's how we grow, right? I didn't flinch. I sipped my flat champagne and looked at the label. Not Grubstack funded. Not anymore. Then came the plaque. Rebecca, with a twinkle in her voice, unwrapped it from a velvet cloth. "For my husband, the man who will lead us all." The crowd cooed. Gerald beamed. But I caught the detail no one else would. The Carter Walsh Company slogan, once etched with our 3 initials, had been modified. My E was gone. What once read ZEG Innovations now simply read ZG Innovations. I hadn't approved any rebranding. I hadn't been told. I was a ghost at my own family's table, a ghost who'd funded the feast. I set down my glass. The rim left a faint circle of moisture on the linen, my only trace. From across the grass, Linda offered a distant nod, the kind you give someone who made it out of rehab or jail. Rebecca held Zach's hand aloft like he was being crowned. Gerald stood to applaud. They were rewriting history. In real time. And I was the silent footnote. I smiled through the bitterness, but inside something cracked and stayed wide open. 3 days later, I walked into my office and found someone else sitting in my chair. She was maybe 25, with a walnut-colored bob and a confident posture far too relaxed for someone perched in what was, until that moment, my space. Her heels were kicked off under the desk and my orchid was gone, replaced with a motivational plaque, "Think bigger." I stood at the doorway, umbrella dripping onto the marble, watching her scroll through a dashboard I had built from scratch. She looked up and blinked. "Oh, are you Emily Carter?" I said flatly. A pause, then a nervous smile. "Oh, HR said you might swing by." Swing by. Like this was a Starbucks I used to own. They didn't mention I'd been unseated. She laughed more out of discomfort than disrespect. It's all temporary, I think. Part of the transition plan. I didn't answer. I turned away toward the frosted glass door that still bore my name, Emily Carter, co-founder. But my keycard beeped red. Twice. Behind me, the woman cleared her throat. You might have to get access revalidated with systems. I walked past the elevator and into the side corridor where Ethan's office door was slightly ajar. The only person I trusted left in this building. He was standing by the window, sleeves rolled, watching the rain snake down the glass in erratic trails. His desk, unlike mine, remained untouched, precise, sterile, defended. Emily, he said without turning. I was wondering how long it'd take before they crossed the line. They didn't cross it, I muttered. They erased it. He gestured to the chair across from him. I sat wet umbrella between my knees and tried to keep my hands from trembling. Your door still has your name, he offered. But the system's email drive internal comms, they've been rerouting things all weekend. So I'm what now? An honorary guest. He tapped a file folder on his desk. HR drafted a courtesy update. You're listed under transitional advisory. I opened the folder. Legalese slithered across the page like oil pending strategic integration in accordance with phase realignment. My name floated in a paragraph like a ghost in someone else's story. They're calling it efficiency, Ethan said, but it's a bloodless takeover. I exhaled slow. Who gave the green light? Not officially clear. But Holdings LLC is absorbing back-end operations. I checked the system's logs, account migration, security sweeps, file access logs, all triggered from a Walsh domain. I stared past him toward the rain. My signature is still missing. He looked at me. You remember the clause? Paragraph 7, subclause C. No full consolidation without unanimous Carter sign-off. That includes me. A silence fell between us. Thick. Knowing. Ethan leaned forward. They think you won't push back. They think I won't notice. He hesitated. There's more. I saw a draft on the shared drive titled Post-Transition Roles. I didn't blink. Let me guess. My role isn't listed. It is, he said grimly, under Legacy Phase-Out Strategy. I stood slowly. My fingers grazed the edge of the folder, then released. What happens if I revoke data access? I asked. You'd trigger a compliance audit. Good. He gave a dry chuckle. That's the Emily I know. I turned to leave. The hallway lights flickered slightly overhead like the building itself was unsure whose name to remember. As I walked past the glassed-in bullpen, I heard a junior associate whisper, "Didn't she used to run this place?" Used to. That's how quickly they rewrote it. Back in the lobby, I passed a digital board listing upcoming leadership meetings. My name had vanished from the agenda. Good. Let them think I was fading. Let them believe I'd sit and eat what I'm served. When you've spent a decade building an empire, you know when someone starts moving the bricks. I didn't have an invite, but I walked into the Carter Innovations 4th floor conference room like I owned the floor plan because I did. The room smelled like fresh ink and soft manipulation. Gerald looked up from his chair at the head of the table, eyebrows arched. Well, he said, didn't expect you this morning. I figured if decisions are being made about my company, I replied I should be in the room. A slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, but his eyes didn't reflect it. It's just an internal review. Nothing binding. Linda sat beside him, flipping through a color-coded binder. She didn't look up. Ethan gave me a discreet nod from the far end of the table. I took a seat, my old 1/3 from the left, just close enough to the screen to read every financial slide, and far enough from the front to observe the performance. The Walsh-appointed CFO stood and clicked the remote. A pie chart flickered to life. Q4 initiatives focus on eliminating overlap, she said, particularly in leadership. Redundancies drain agility. On the screen, my division's strategic marketing and growth was labeled non-core. I leaned back slowly. Non-core, I asked, feigning surprise. The CFO barely blinked. Under the new structure, core functions are defined as capital flow backend ops and executive oversight. And the division that secured us a 2-year runway during the 2020 downturn, I asked. She glanced at Gerald, then back at me. The board believes those contributions were significant at the time. Gerald cleared his throat. Emily, this isn't about the past, it's about moving forward. By moving me out, he raised his hand slightly. We're streamlining, giving you breathing room. Linda spoke without looking up. You've been under a lot of stress. Maybe it's time to step back. For your health. My laugh came out dry and quiet. Is that the official recommendation? The CFO resumed, shifting to a spreadsheet. We're also reallocating marketing oversight to Zachary. He's been showing initiative. Ethan slid a folder toward me, casual and unnoticed. I opened it beneath the table revenue attribution sheets. My division had outperformed every other quarter, by a margin wide enough to buy me a lawsuit. You want to talk initiative? I asked. Let's talk numbers. My team's carrying this company's growth curve. The CFO's voice flattened. We appreciate the work, Emily. But this transition has been in motion for months. Without my input. Gerald leaned forward, eyes narrowed. You're still on the foundation board? That's not nothing. Linda finally looked at me, voice sweet and venom-laced. Let's focus on where you can truly shine. Ambassadorial roles, public-facing. Leave the heavy lifting to the next generation. Next generation. Like I hadn't broken bones building this place. I closed the folder gently, slid it back toward Ethan. No worries, I said, with a smile rising slowly. If you're writing me out, at least spell my name right. I always knew they'd try to erase me. I just didn't expect them to be so clumsy about it. The glow of my laptop cast a sterile light across the living room, cutting through the soft shadows that flickered from the fireplace. Rain whispered at the windows, but the storm was inside me. I stared at the screen, our company website, and scrolled to the footer. The line that used to read "Founded by Emily Carter, driven by family" had been replaced. Now it said, "A legacy, led by the Walsh vision." I shut the laptop harder than I meant to. A few minutes later, Ethan answered my call on the second ring. I saw it, he said before I could speak. I didn't think they'd be that blatant. They're not even pretending anymore. Then you shouldn't either. You want to play their game, fine, but not on their terms. I went to war for this brand. And they're betting you won't do it again, he said quietly. Stay smart, Emily. Don't throw the first punch, just make sure they don't see yours coming. By Sunday night, my townhouse felt smaller than ever. The Carter-Walsh family dinners had once been ritual. Now they were theater. The dining room was staged perfectly. Crystal glasses reflected the firelight. Candles lined the center of the mahogany table like soldiers standing at attention. Silverware gleamed with sterile precision. Gerald sat at the head, hands folded. Linda hovered, as always, behind the illusion of grace. Zachary raised a glass halfway through the meal. Rebecca's been working closely with our new PR team. Her vision for growth, branding, storytelling, it's what we've been missing. Rebecca smiled like she was trying not to. We just needed a little polish, a little cohesion. My fork hovered over the lamb on my plate. Polish. You mean like erasing the founder? Zach blinked. It's not erasing, it's updating. With your name at the center. He sighed, setting down his glass. This isn't personal, it's optics. Clients want stability, a narrative. I give them that. You give them what I built. You were great once. But now you look angry. And alone. I stood slowly, letting the silence stretch. Later, after dessert, I found him in the hallway near the coat closet. I cornered him without touching him, just with presence. You know, this isn't just your company, I said. He didn't meet my eyes. I'm what clients want to see now. Not a lone wolf founder with no family behind her. Family, I hissed. They're rewriting my life while you smile for the camera. He looked at me then. Not with hate, but worse pity. Emily, sometimes you just have to know when it's time. I opened my mouth, but a quiet cough interrupted us. Haley, our cousin, stood in the hallway with a wine glass. She hadn't said a word all night, but now her eyes flicked between the two of us. She said nothing, but she saw everything. She raised one eyebrow almost imperceptibly, then slipped back toward the dining room. The final toast came from Linda. She stood with practiced elegance, glass raised. To legacy, she said, voice rich and warm, the kind built together. She didn't look at me, not once. I sipped my wine, the bitterness crawling down my throat like acid. They think legacy skips a generation. I'll show them it skips the obedient. I didn't plan revenge that night, but I did open the drawer with the original contract. The study was dim, the kind of warm amber darkness that wrapped around me like a silk robe too long unworn. Rain tapped at the windows, polite but insistent, while a low trumpet hummed from the speakers. Miles Davis maybe, but I wasn't listening to music. I was listening to the silence. It was the first one in days that didn't feel like defeat. I opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet beside my desk. It stuck for a second, swollen from humidity or age, then gave way with a sharp metallic sigh. My fingers moved past the usual folders until they stopped on the deep blue one labeled in faded silver ink Founding Papers, Carter Innovations. The folder was heavier than I remembered. I laid it flat on the desk, flipping through the sheets. Partnership outlines, early equity drafts, investment timelines. And there it was. Section 12.3, Joint Venture Clause. Final ownership consolidation requires original founding partners' written consent in ink. Not e-signature, not verbal. My signature. Mine. I sat back, heart thumping with a rhythm far sharper than jazz. They could restructure, redesign, even rename. But they couldn't fully claim it, not legally. Not without my consent. They'd been building on an assumption. But I had the clause. I had the leverage. I picked up my phone, dialed Ethan. He answered quickly. Emily, I found it. He didn't need me to say more. The clause clear as glass. They never finalized the activation. Then they've been shifting assets without legal authority. That's breach of contract. And if I terminate the joint venture, then they lose all access to client IP tech licenses, even the platform backend. Everything tied to your name. I stood walking to the window. The rain had picked up. Good. Let it all pour. Ethan, I said, voice even. Draft me a clean termination notice. Nothing inflammatory. Just facts. There was a pause. Then, you sure I'm not swinging the sword? Yet. But I want it in my hand. He exhaled. Understood. I'll have it ready by morning. I hung up. Moments later, my phone buzzed again. A text from Haley. You should see this. Below it, an audio file. I hesitated, then tapped it open. A rustle of silverware, background chatter. Then a voice, Linda's. Emily's not a threat. She's a liability with a logo. Once we finalize the transfer, she won't even have that. Silence followed until Zach's voice cut in. We should keep her name for a few more months. It still pulls media interest. Another voice, Rebecca's, chimed in with a laugh. A pretty logo. No engine. I didn't flinch. I replayed the sentence. A liability with a logo? And I smiled. For the first time in days, my mouth curved upward without force. Not bitter, not broken, just sharp. I turned back to the desk, pulled open my laptop, and searched my legal archives. The template termination notice was still bookmarked. I downloaded it, opened a new document. I didn't rush. Each field I filled, in each clause I highlighted, each date I cross-checked. It felt like placing bricks. But this time, I was the one holding the blueprint. They built this on my name. Let's see how they do when I take it back. They erased my seat but forgot I still held the spare key to the vault. The best way to bury a secret is in plain sight. So I started with their board minutes. It was past 10 p.m. When I slipped back into the office, a thermos of burnt coffee in hand and the ghost of a plan in my head. Carter Innovations was silent at this hour, just the low hum of ventilation and the dull reflection of my silhouette against the glass walls. The motion sensor lights clicked on as I passed, illuminating the path I used to walk with purpose. Now I moved like a trespasser in my own home. My keycard still worked. They'd stripped my title, locked my accounts, tried to clip my name from every contract, but they forgot the system admin override I'd built myself during the company's early days. Back when no one cared about power hierarchies, because we were just trying to survive. I sat at an unused workstation in the back, fingers poised over the keyboard. The portal was still there, my back door into the archive server. A little messy, no proper UI, but it did the job. I pulled up the board meeting minutes first. Line after line of sanitized language scrolled before me. Unanimous vote, strategic delegation, minor structural shift. But buried beneath the corporate gloss were timestamps, metadata, and signatures, none of them mine. Gerald had temporarily assumed my voting rights in 3 meetings, all without formal proxy. Linda had approved a resolution shifting advisory privileges to an external consultant, Rebecca, no doubt. Each action hinged on the assumption I wouldn't notice, or wouldn't fight. I took screenshots of everything, dated, time-stamped, compiled into a folder named Ghost Protocol. My phone buzzed. A message from Ethan E. Check your inbox. Something you need to see. Attached was a scanned loan guarantee agreement. My company's logo at the top, my digital signature missing at the bottom. The amount, 7 figures, had been co-signed by someone from the Walsh Holdings team. I hadn't authorized it. No notification, no board vote, no damn clue. I called him. Ethan? What the hell is this? They used your old stamp to process a collateral assurance, he said, voice hushed. They probably assumed it would go unnoticed until quarterly audits, and the bank didn't flag it. Linda filed it under a dormant operating entity one you created during the second seed round. Technically, it's still live. Technically, they didn't even need your password. I leaned back, heart pounding beneath my ribs like a warning drum. Technically, they're committing fraud. There was silence on the other end, which told me Ethan agreed. Another ping. Haley. HCAN then. They're checking internal logins. I heard someone ask about access history. She was watching too. I typed back. Got it. Thanks. Stay quiet. Then deleted the message immediately. Back on the screen, I dove into recent financial filings. They were subtle updates, so small they could have passed as clerical tweaks. But I caught them. My shares' 38% ownership in Carter Innovations had been provisionally restructured under the Carter Family Holdings Trust, pending beneficiary signature. The beneficiary Zachary. The signature, not mine. Not yet. If filed correctly, if I hadn't noticed, they could have finalized the reassignment under Virginia trust law within 30 days. All it would have taken was one forged signature, one rubber-stamped notary. I would have shown up to the new year stripped of every legal claim I'd built over 11 years. I stared at the blinking cursor, bile rising in my throat. They weren't just sidelining me. They were surgically removing me from history. But the clause I'd rediscovered days ago still held weight. Section 14C, all equity and transferal decisions require the original founder's physical signature. Mine. I had the clause. I had the file. I had the lie. And now, I had motive. Outside rain began to patter against the windows, soft but steady, as if the night itself knew something had shifted. I copied every altered file to a clean drive, encrypted and password locked. Then another drive. Then a third one for Haley, one for Ethan, one for me. Just as I began to shut down the terminal, another message lit the screen. H. They're in the system. Log out. Now. I yanked the USB from the port, closed every window in a blur of keystrokes, and wiped the local cache. Heart in my throat, I waited, watched. Nothing triggered. No alarms. No footsteps. But someone had been watching, and they weren't just trying to push me out anymore. Someone's trying to erase me legally this time. I didn't hit them hard, just enough to make them flinch. The ballroom at the Four Seasons shimmered with the kind of curated elegance only old money and new power could afford. Polished silver, perfectly chilled champagne, and conversations so measured you could calibrate stock portfolios by their tone. Tonight wasn't a wedding, but it had the same field tables arranged with intention glances exchanged like contracts, and somewhere in the middle of it all, Linda and Gerald Carter pitching the crown jewel of the family Carter innovations. They didn't know I was coming. From the mezzanine, I watched the room like a hunter behind glass. Haley stood by the exit pretending to scroll her phone. She gave a small nod, target in sight. I descended the steps slowly, each heel click muffled by carpet and tension. The representatives from JY Capital, a Korean investment fund with a reputation for swift acquisitions, were seated center stage. Linda was mid-sentence, and with Carter Innovations integrating seamlessly into the holding structure, we're primed for global expansion. I reached the foot of the platform, let the pause stretch. Gerald caught my eye, blinked like he'd seen a ghost. I took the mic from the stand casually, like I'd always had the right. With respect to my parents, I began. I'd like to clarify something for our esteemed guests at JY Capital. A ripple moved through the crowd. Linda's wineglass stopped just short of her lips. As the founding shareholder of Carter Innovations, I have not signed any documents consenting to a transfer of ownership or structural integration with Walsh Holdings. Silence, not confusion, just immediate recalibration. I advise any interested investors to conduct enhanced due diligence. There may be inconsistencies in the documentation provided. One of the JY reps leaned toward his associate, whispering in Korean. The younger one nodded, tapped something on his tablet. From the side, Ethan's voice reached me like a smirk under breath. That was loud. Gerald tried to salvage it, his voice smooth, but eyes frantic. My daughter's understandably emotional. There's been family strain. The eldest of the Korean reps adjusted his cufflinks, then turned to him. Mr. Carter, we value transparency above all. We'll need to review the shareholder registry and founding documents before proceeding further. Linda spoke next, calm but sharp. This isn't the forum for internal disputes. I smiled. Neither is your attempt to sell what isn't legally yours. The mic clicked as I set it down. I didn't wait for the room to recover. I turned and walked toward the back, feeling the weight of 30 eyes track me across the floor. As I passed Haley, she whispered, "You should have seen Linda's face." "She'll recover," I said. But now she knows I'm not bluffing. We stepped into the corridor where Ethan was waiting. He handed me a folder. "They're going to dig. Hard." "Let them," I said, taking it. This wasn't a threat. It was documentation. He raised an eyebrow. "What's next?" I didn't answer. Because tonight wasn't about escalation. It was about imbalance. About shaking their confidence just enough to make their hands tremble the next time they hold a pen. I walked out into the December air coat, unbuttoned, the cold biting, but I felt warm. Inside, deals were being reconsidered. And for the first time in weeks, I wasn't reacting. I was initiating. I wasn't bluffing. I was documenting. They sent a lawyer. I sent a clause. The office smelled like fresh paper and steel, the kind of clean that made you feel like nothing bad could happen here. Ms. Patel looked up from the stack of documents I had laid before her, her brows arched in mild, intrigued disbelief. "This clause," she said, slowly tapping the page with her pen, "isn't just leverage, it's a loaded gun with a silencer. They built their empire on a trapdoor and you own the key." I didn't smile, but I didn't blink either. "They've used my name, my equity, and my silence?" I said. "Let's see what happens when I remove all three." She nodded, then got to work reading every line, marking every angle. I sat quietly, my phone buzzing periodically with new messages from Ethan and Haley. The silence between emails felt heavier than any courtroom. By noon, Ms. Patel had built the first phase of our operation, a formal declaration of withdrawal from all operational endorsements of the Carter Innovations brand. It wasn't the kill shot. It was a freeze frame locking every asset, every deal in a state of pending review. Once this is sent, your accounts tied to Carter will be flagged, she warned. The bank won't shut them, but they'll pause anything requiring unanimous authorization. Good, I said, eyes on the clause. Then they can't move a penny until we say so. Minutes later, the email was crafted and dispatched to all concerned stakeholders. Effective immediately, I, Emily Carter, as founding stakeholder of Carter Innovations, am suspending all brand and operational authorizations until further legal review. All contracts using the Carter brand or its derivatives are hereby revoked, pending further examination of joint venture compliance. It was the kind of message that didn't shout, but detonated. Less than 30 minutes later, I received a reply from the bank. We are currently reviewing credit extensions and operational liquidity for Carter Innovations per Governance Clause 5.1 in light of inter-entity disputes. Translation: they were frozen. Haley texted. Just drop the meeting notes into your folder. Walsh knew. Gerald pushed to proceed anyway. Check slide 8. Slide 8 was the bullet. In a closed-door meeting days before the JY Capital presentation, Walsh Holdings had acknowledged that Carter's equity needed Emily's signature to clear the merger. Yet they continued anyway, calling it a risk worth taking. I forwarded the slide to Ms. Patel. This is premeditation, she muttered. We can escalate. Then escalate. My voice was cold steel. We spent the next hour drafting the official contract violation notice. Ms. Patel didn't pad it with legalese fluff. Every line was surgical. This wasn't a bluff. It was an invitation to a formal war. While she finalized the draft, Ethan called. His voice was lower than usual, a whisper coated in tension. They're calling emergency board meetings. Trying to keep it quiet. But Gerald, he looked spooked. Let him. It's about time they wondered what I know. You sure about this next step? No, I replied honestly. But I'm sure I'm not stopping. The document came through just before 5 p.m. Subject formal warning of contract breach and demand for immediate cease and desist attached were the original agreements, the annotated violations, and the formal intent to proceed to interagency investigation if no reply came within 72 hours. I reviewed it once, then signed it. With one keystroke, I sent it directly to every senior partner of Walsh Holdings, their legal team, and the bank compliance unit. No fireworks, no music, just silence dense, immediate dangerous. Let's see how well they swim when the water turns legal. They came after my access. I came after their silence. I knew something was wrong the moment my screen blinked twice, then went black. I sat motionless in the Carter Innovations conference room, the morning sun barely filtering through the tinted glass. I tried to refresh my credentials. Nothing. The system refused me like an immune body rejecting a foreign invader. Then came the alerts: access denied. Account disabled. Contact administrator. I reached for my phone. Ethan picked up after 2 rings, voice low and clipped. I'm in the building. I'm seeing lockdown protocols. You. They froze me out, I said. Not just my login. I just checked my personal bank app isn't loading either. Silence. They flagged you, he muttered. Internal IT must have pushed a security override. Gerald, I asked. Probably, but he wouldn't do it without Linda. Within the hour, I received a formal notice from the Walsh Holdings legal department stating that I was under investigation for misrepresentation of executive authority. The phrase made my stomach twist, not because it was true, but because it was so strategically vile. By implying I'd falsely represented myself, they were trying to erase the basis of everything I'd filed, every document, every clause, every word. I tried calling my parents. No answer. I called the board liaison, redirected to voicemail. Ms. Patel. My attorney responded with one line. They're setting up a preemptive case. Don't speak to anyone directly. I closed the blinds in my office and stared at the faint outline of my own reflection in the glass. For the first time in weeks, I felt the grip of something like defeat crawling up my spine. I'd made the first move, but they were dragging me off the board, off the payroll, and now off the grid. They wanted me isolated, unfunded, voiceless. I drove home under gray skies and heavier silence. My townhouse felt unfamiliar, as though the walls too were waiting for me to give up. I sat on the edge of my couch, phone in hand, mind blank. Then buzz. A single email. Subject: Emily, you should hear this. From Haley. No message body, just an attachment. An audio file labeled Deck 4, Carter Family Discussion, Clip 3. I hesitated, then pressed play. She's already sent notices. Get her out of the system. I don't want her accessing a single file, not a memo, not a ledger, nothing. Do you understand Linda's voice? Crystal clear, calm, commanding. She's leveraging the contract. Another voice, Gerald maybe. Then cut her off. Fully. If she comes to the office, call security. This ends now. My breath caught. The timestamp was perfect. The context undeniable. It wasn't a technical glitch. It wasn't IT policy. It was a coordinated purge. And now I had proof. I forwarded the file to Ms. Patel. No subject, no explanation, just a message below it. Let's escalate. Ethan texted a moment later. Whatever you just did, there's chatter. Gerald pulled out of a meeting mid-presentation. My fingers shook as I typed back. I'm not the virus. I'm the forensic trace. My silence was strategic. Now my words will be forensic. The last card they forgot I had was the one I never played. The safe wasn't hard to open. Grandpa's old habits, birthday combinations, backup keys, and drawer linings hadn't changed. Neither had the faint scent of cedar from his army scarf, neatly folded and still wrapped around the rusting lockbox he always told us held his real war chest. I hadn't touched it since the funeral. Until now. I didn't expect to find it. Not tonight. Not like this. I was only looking for the original contract, the founding document we both signed on that freezing February afternoon, in his study, hands numb but eyes blazing with ambition. Carter Innovations wasn't just a business, it was our promise. What I found instead was a sealed envelope. My name written in his scratchy block letters, underlined twice. Inside, a signed copy of the company's formation agreement. Not just any copy. This one had a handwritten amendment from Grandpa, initialed and notarized, granting me exclusive veto power over any mergers, dissolutions, or equity realignments tied to family partnerships. A veto clause. Undisclosed. Untouched. Undeniable. And a note folded behind it. If they forget who kept this ship afloat, remind them. I sat back in the leather chair, the old kind that squeaks even when you don't move. Rain tapped the windows like distant applause or warning. My hands trembled, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was ignition. My phone buzzed. A new message from Haley. A scanned letter handwritten in soft loops I hadn't seen since middle school. She'd left it at the front desk with instructions not to open it unless I'd already gone nuclear. I guess we both knew this day would come. Her letter didn't just explain why she stayed silent. It brought me back to a moment I'd long buried, me sitting with her in a coffee shop after her scholarship got revoked, quietly, wiring her the money under a fake business expense, asking nothing in return. You never told anyone, she wrote, and I never forgot. Loyalty isn't about being loud, it's about remembering. I reread it twice, blinking through tears I didn't want to call tears. Gratitude can hurt when you're not used to receiving it. Then Ethan's face popped onto the screen video call midnight sharp. His shirt was rumpled tie gone, eyes alert. "The board's panicking," he said without preamble. "You spooked the investors. Walsh Holdings is hemorrhaging trust, but they still think you'll settle. They're prepping a restructuring apology for Q1. I held up the document. "They're going to need a new script." His eyes widened. "Is that—" "It's what ends the guessing," I said. We stayed quiet for a beat, the kind of silence where the world pivots. I scanned the clause, embedded it into a legal brief, and forwarded it to Ms. Patel with a single instruction: convene an emergency shareholder meeting. Include the founding veto clause. Send it before dawn. Then I turned off every light but the one over the fireplace. The flames crackled softly as I sipped tea that had gone cold 2 hours ago. Christmas Eve will be silent for them too. I made sure of that. He thought he buried the truth. I brought the resurrection. The rain hit my windshield like it had something to prove. I parked outside what used to be Davenport and Hale, now just a rusted plaque hanging crooked above a boarded window. The coordinates Carla sent me in that distorted voicemail from last night had led here. Her voice had sounded old, worn, but underneath there was defiance. Inside the waiting room was dark except for a single desk lamp flickering in the back. A woman with silver hair bundled in 2 scarves and a shawl that smelled faintly of camphor was seated behind a desk cluttered with pill bottles and yellowed envelopes. Carla Davenport, my aunt, the family's former estate lawyer, exiled 2 decades ago after what they called an ethical dispute. I never knew the details. Now I did. "You came?" she said without lifting her head. Her voice had gravel but no weakness. "You asked." She let out a bitter laugh. "I didn't ask. I warned." She gestured to a nearby chair, then handed me a thin envelope and a flash drive in a velvet pouch. "The kind you'd expect to hold earrings, not revolutions." "I kept it," she murmured. "All these years. Your grandfather told me to. He knew they'd come for you someday." I stared at the sealed envelope. It had Grandpa Henry's scrawl, his full name, date, and one word in red ink: valid. "He trusted you?" I asked, my voice more brittle than I meant it to be. She turned her gaze to the foggy window. "I was a coward. I took their money. I let your mother rip pages out of your future. But I never destroyed the originals." And now Carla reached for a tiny vial beside her. "Morphine, the kind of dose that says goodbye without fanfare. Now I make peace. That file contains the notarized will naming you sole trustee. Your brother has no legal claim, not if the fraud is exposed." I felt the world narrow to that envelope. One paper, one voice recording, one woman who had waited her entire broken life to hand it to the right hands. She coughed hard, blood tinging the edge of a lace handkerchief. Her caregiver peeked from the hallway but said nothing. "I won't tell you what to do," Emily Carla said, her eyes sharpening. "But once you open this, you don't get to be the version of yourself who didn't know." I nodded slowly. The rain softened. Or maybe I just stopped hearing it. I stood. "Thank you." She waved me off like a ghost waving from the shore. I didn't cry. Not yet. Back in the car, I set the envelope on the passenger seat next to the velvet pouch. I started the engine, and the moment the flash drive connected to the dashboard port, the stereo clicked. A voice filled the cabin. Raspy. Clear. Mine, but older. "If you're hearing this, they've stolen everything. Grandpa. Truth doesn't whisper. It detonates." The room shimmered with chandeliers and the scent of tailored arrogance. Brandon stood at the podium of the Richmond Conference Hall, his voice amplified by million-dollar acoustics, hands slicing the air with every self-important phrase. Behind him, Carter and Sons' gilded crest loomed across the LED screen. The annual gala was in full swing, bow ties, champagne, and too many people who'd forgotten where the company started. I sat near the back, my name not listed among the speakers, nor acknowledged on the welcome placards. But I didn't need acknowledgement. Not tonight. Brandon was in his element, gliding through metrics and buzzwords. Innovation, legacy, synergy, he droned, then smiled with faux modesty. We've weathered storms this year, but the future is Carter. Applause. Cameras flashed. I waited until the end of the Q&A session. The floor was open for shareholders, and Brandon leaned back smugly, signaling the moderator with a nod. He didn't notice when Erica, seated beside me, subtly pressed play on the flash drive tucked into the AV console. The ballroom's lights dimmed slightly as the house system engaged. Then came the voice. "If you're hearing this," said my grandfather, slow and gravelly, "they've stolen everything." Gasps rippled like a wave through silk. Brandon's smile faltered. "I, Henry Carter, in sound mind, state this for record. My original will designates my granddaughter Emily June Carter as the sole trustee of the Carter Trust. Any document excluding her was tampered with under duress or fraud." Silence. Every spoon froze mid-air. A wine glass shattered somewhere near the front. Grandpa's voice continued. "Brandon Carter has betrayed this family's name. He is not to hold authority over Carter and Sons. Not now, not ever." The audio clicked off. Then I stood, walked down the carpeted aisle, heels echoing louder than the applause had minutes earlier. I placed a sealed envelope on the podium facing the board. "This is the notarized copy of my grandfather's will," I said calmly. "Authenticated. Dated before the one you've all been using. I've brought counsel and witnesses." Brandon lunged for the mic. "This is fabricated." A stunt one of the board members raised his hand. "We need a closed session, now." Erica stepped up, handing out copies of the will. Flashbulbs ignited again, this time capturing chaos, not celebration. The moderator called for recess. Voices erupted. Some board members stood to leave. Others surrounded Erica and me with questions, their voices clipped and panicked. Brandon looked trapped, like a man whose parachute failed mid-flight. I turned and exited before the vote was cast. Outside, the cold air slapped my cheeks. Natalie was waiting beneath the portico, arms folded, her breath a fog of fury. "You think this ends here?" she hissed. "You've started a war." I didn't blink, didn't flinch. Truth doesn't whisper. It detonates. When kings fall, queens rise. The headlines wrote themselves: Brandon Carter heir, a parent undone by the very arrogance that once gilded his ascent. I didn't leak the files. I didn't have to. The truth has a way of clawing its way to daylight when too many people are paid to keep it buried. And the day began with claws. The Richmond Observer broke it first: financial irregularities and forged documents, Carter legacy under federal review. Within hours, MSNBC ran a segment with side-by-side images, Brandon in tuxedo glory at last year's gala, and now hunched, emerging from a courthouse shadow, with lips pressed and eyes hollow. The mighty fall fastest when they think no one dares to push. From the quiet of my grandfather's study, mine now, I watched the empire tremble through glass and silence. The walls were still paneled in the same oak Grandpa Henry loved. His scent still lingered faintly like a warning. He once said to me, "Power doesn't corrupt, it reveals. Let's see what you become when you finally hold it." I didn't feel triumphant. I felt ready. Daniel called that morning, his voice steadier than I remembered. "I have emails," he said without preamble. "From 2 years ago, Brandon and Gerald discussing misappropriating trust funds. I want immunity." "Are you willing to testify?" I asked. He hesitated. "I owe your grandfather that much." I said nothing, but I thought of Carla, now buried. Of Ethan, whose silence was his own kind of war. Of Haley, who was already compiling every document Daniel forwarded with precision. The legal advisors from Carter and Sons filed the emergency motions by noon. As the sole trustee, courtesy of the notarized will Carla handed me, I froze all outgoing financial flows from Brandon's portfolios. His offshore roots dried up first. Then the shell accounts under Holdings Inc. began unraveling like cheap thread. Emily, my lawyer Erica, said that afternoon, Brandon's lawyers are begging for a settlement. They'll offer silence in exchange for keeping his record clean. No, I replied. Let them scream. By nightfall, Daniel was on the record handing over his sworn affidavit. News anchors used the phrase insider whistleblower repeatedly. A blurry image of him entering the federal building became another thumbnail in the war of perception. And yet, amidst the chaos, I didn't seek the spotlight. I went to the Carter Foundation's office, changed the security access, and began the quiet work of untangling decades of inherited rot. Gerald had once said philanthropy was a good PR filter. I would make it a weapon of healing instead. Ethan checked in briefly by text. You're turning silence into strategy. Impressive. This was never about noise. I replied, it was about permanence. But the silence didn't last. Around 9:43 p.m., just as I finished reviewing the internal audit, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. A single text. No greeting. No name. It read, Natalie has your son's file. She'll go after him next. My chest locked. For a split second, the cold professionalism I had cultivated cracked, just as it had at that wedding table when they handed me the kitchen seat, like I was someone's inconvenient +1. I stared at the message. There was no time to ask how they knew, no use guessing why Brandon, even mid-collapse, would toss a final grenade my way. I stood heart-thudding. The game had changed again, and I wasn't about to let Natalie draw blood from the only place I hadn't armored. The house was silent when I woke, just the faintest trace of winter sun bleeding through the blinds. Ethan had fallen asleep on the couch again, curled up in his hoodie, a textbook spread across his chest, and his laptop still glowing dimly beside him. I stood for a moment just watching him breathe. A part of me wanted to let it all end here, just shut the door on lawsuits, inheritance wars, and legacy. Let the world burn itself down while I stayed wrapped in this fragile peace. But healing isn't silence. It's confrontation. Not of others, but of the things we've left unsaid. He stirred when I made coffee, shuffling into the kitchen with sleep in his eyes. No defenses, no distance. Just the boy I used to tuck in when the world got too loud. You didn't come to my science fair, he said quietly without preamble. I waited. The entire time. The words landed like stones. I didn't try to explain. Didn't reach for excuses about shareholder meetings or time zones. Instead, I leaned back against the counter and nodded. I know, I said. And I'm sorry. We sat across from each other at the table, steaming mugs between us like a peace offering. He pulled up his sleeve, then revealing the faint scar near his wrist. The one I'd always seen, but never asked about. I did that the day Grandpa died, he said, voice low. Not deep. Just enough to feel something. I closed my eyes. That night came back in fragments. My flight rerouted, my phone dead. Brandon's smirk as he took center stage at the estate meeting. I hadn't known Ethan was alone. I hadn't even thought to ask. I failed you, I whispered. He shook his head. No, you just got lost. But you found your way back. A knock at the door broke the moment. Erica stood there in a navy trench coat holding a manila folder with the state seal embossed in red. It's done, she said. You're officially the trustee of the Carter estate. Full control, no conditions. I signed without ceremony. The pen barely trembled. That afternoon, Linda came by. She didn't knock. Just left a single white rose on the front steps and walked away, her silhouette dissolving into the mist like a ghost visiting her own grave. I didn't chase her. There was nothing left to say. Instead, I drove to the old family chapel, the one Grandpa built after his service years back, when faith still meant rebuilding rather than revenge. The air inside was cold and thick with memory. I lit a candle, one for Carla, one for Daniel, one for Brandon. Mercy isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the only strength you have left when everything else is vengeance. The Bible on the altar had always been his. Dog-eared, annotated, full of sermon notes and margin scribbles. I turned to the first blank page. There it was etched in faded ink. Emily is the one. My true heir. My correction. I pressed my hand against the words and closed my eyes. For once, I felt still. When I returned home, Ethan was on the porch watching the snow begin to fall. "You okay?" I asked. "Better," he said. "Hungry." We ordered takeout curled under the same blanket and laughed at a bad movie like war hadn't happened just days before. Then the mail arrived. Thick envelope. No return address. But the handwriting was unmistakable. Inside a lawsuit. Natalie Carter versus Emily Carter. Claim joint marital stake in Carter Innovations. Ground spousal entitlement. I stared at the final line circled in red ink. This is not over. The Boston air bit through my coat as I stood facing the glass, the early morning sun catching on the new gold lettering like it had been waiting for this day as long as I had. Claire and Carter Advisory. That was the name etched across the tempered glass. Clean, unassuming sharp. Not a monument, but a marker. The street was quiet at this hour. No ribbon cutting, no press, no family members pretending to cheer while calculating their cut. Just me alone, hands bare, and a key in my pocket that no one else had touched. My name was on the door. Not inherited, not gifted, not contested. Mine. Alyssa arrived 10 minutes later, breathless and beaming, holding a small box tied with navy string. "It's tradition," she said, handing me the keys. First-generation firms always start with cheap pens, a coffee machine that leaks, and one impossible client you'll probably regret taking. I smiled. "Sounds perfect." She looked at me for a long moment before adding, "They're still watching, you know. I hope they are." Once she left, I stepped inside. The floors still smelled like fresh varnish. The walls were bare, no awards, no degrees, no family portraits. Just space, possibility. My phone buzzed. A voice message from Erica. "You did it, Claire. You didn't just expose them. You replaced them. Quietly. Elegantly. I'm proud to have been in your corner. I saved it. Not for vanity, but for the days I'd forget what it cost to get here." On the front desk was a single envelope, Linda's handwriting recognizable even before I opened it. No apology, no warmth, no request for reconciliation. Just 8 words. "You were always more Walsh than we deserved." I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. Some truths don't need reaction. They just sit beside you like old ghosts nodding in agreement. Beneath the envelope, a yellow post-it stuck to the glass. "Keep building. D. Daniel." The man who'd once held our family secrets in quiet resignation. His testimony broke the final stone in Brandon's crumbling throne. And this, I suppose, was his last word. Not goodbye. Just a nudge forward. The space still echoed, but it was the kind of echo that invited voices, footsteps, life. I picked up the metal sign, cool and heavy in my hands, and hung it with care above the door. No ceremony, just silence and clarity. No one clapped. No one filmed it. But I felt it settle into place, not just on the glass, but inside me. Claire. Not Emily, not liability, not glorified gate guard. Claire Carter. Owner. Founder. Heir by merit, not by bloodline. I poured a coffee, the bitter kind I used to hate, but had learned to survive on. As I sipped, the front door creaked open. A woman stepped inside. Tall, direct, in a tailored coat that said she had choices and rarely made the wrong one. "You're Carter?" she asked. "Claire Carter," I replied. She extended her hand. "I heard you don't just fight. You win." I shook her hand. "That depends what we're fighting for." She smiled, sharp and knowing. "Then I'm in the right place." The door clicked shut behind her. And just like that, the next chapter began, not with fireworks but with footsteps. Some battles end not with sirens but with a single name etched in gold. The betrayal she once carried like a wound became the weapon that reclaimed her future. Justice didn't arrive in time, but it arrived in full, undeniable force. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, truth may come late, but when it sounds, it silences every lie. Comment 1. If this story spoke to your sense of justice, or 2. If you're still waiting for more, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful journeys like this.